in. I have the immense pleasure of introducing Edward Casillas. He is coming to us from Tucson, Arizona. He's a loving father and grandfather and a dedicated and passionate father advocate. He has a wealth of experience managing fatherhood-related programs in Arizona and working with organizations dedicated to strengthening families and improving the well-being of our children here. So we're very, very excited to have him with us. And alongside him is Michael Huesca. He leads an advocacy organization dedicated to supporting fathers and families called POPS, or Paternal Opportunities Programs and Services, in the beautiful San Diego, California. He's also an expert in dealing with male victims of domestic violence and is a well-recognized father advocate who has served an integral role in several national strengthening family initiatives. And most importantly, also a loving and very resilient father. So we are very grateful for their expertise and their insight. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Edward. I will stop sharing my screen and let them take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. I see some people that I know here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm just honored to get this opportunity to share some of the insights over the years that we have learned and what we know works when working with fathers. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and get started with the PowerPoint. All right. Can everybody see that? Yes. All right. All right. So with me today is my good friend and colleague, Michael Huesca, an amazing father, good man. I'm just so pleased to be able to do this with him. And what we have come up with, I think, is phenomenal. I think it is powerful. I really do believe that this is going to make a difference in fathers that we work with. I think it's going to make a difference in the systems. It's going to make a difference in our state and throughout the nation. So with that, I want to introduce my good friend, Michael Huesca.
Thanks, Edward. As you've heard, my name is Michael Huesca. I'm based in San Diego, California. I have been doing this work for a little over 2 decades. Our organization, Paternal Opportunity Programs and Services, POPS, has been around for 14 years, about 14 years, and I've been with the organization about 10. The organization has been really working on, understanding what it is to engage fathers, right? For so long, we've been talking about engaging fathers. And some of what we're going to discuss today is much more about not just engaging, but now what does it look like to partner? And so we're going to dive into a little bit of that. But before that, Edward.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. So my name is Edward Casillas. For those that know me, I just want to say hi to you, and I'm glad we're all here together. I am a proud father of 3 children and 2 grandchildren. My little Gracie, who's about 2.5 years old, and my little grandson, Lucas Edward, who's 1.5 years. And I'm telling you, he is like a little Hulk. He just runs around the house. He stomps wherever he goes. He doesn't grab anything gently. He knocks it over. And when he grabs something, he's got a grip. So I love being a dad. I love being a grandfather. There's been a lot of challenges, but I've embraced every one. And I have been working with fathers for, I think, well over 13 years now here in the state, and done some national work. And I just love doing what I do because not only through my own experience with receiving support, I was able to change some things in my life and become a better man, a better father, but I also like supporting others and seeing the change in their lives. And so I'm so thankful for this opportunity. I really, really am. And Michael touched on a little bit about, what POPS does, and I'm so glad to be a part of POPS as well. And what we started talking about, we have combined, 30 years of experience working with fathers. And we've seen a lot of challenges. We've seen some fatherhood programs come and go. But what we've seen across the board, too, is that we all want to work with fathers. We know how important they are. And so we started really developing what worked, what didn't work, and we came up with Authentic Fatherhood Partnerships. And so, Michael, I'm going to turn that over to you a little bit and talk a little bit more about what we've created.
Thanks, Edward. Yeah, so a lot of our conversations had been for those of us who've been doing this for a long time have been, okay, so how do we engage fathers? How do we engage fathers? How do we engage fathers? And what we want to lift, maybe not dwell on this position, but understand is that the system that we currently operate in is not designed for parent engagement, but specifically, there are added barriers when it comes to fathers. There's a lot of bias that exists. And often we have to recognize that our cultures in which we work in have these biases integrated in them. So even with the best intentions, there are challenges put in our way that are systemic. And so, first for us, is like being true and honest about what that looks like. And so what we've done with fatherhood, authentic fatherhood partnership is really analyzed. One, what are our biases? And that includes, how was I impacted by having the father that I had, or not having a father that not having a father, right? How did that impact me in my work? Do I have some implicit bias? Do I have some other biases that are there that I'm not even conscious of, that I'm not even sure of, right? And so we know that these one and done workshops come, they give us good information, but we really need long-term practices, long-term technical support. We need long-term investment in relationship building because our system doesn't always support that. And so those are really key factors in authentic fatherhood partnership, is addressing those. And sometimes you can't jump up and shout it out, right? There's this bias. Sometimes it takes strategy and navigation and implementation strategies to actually get what you need to get done. It is a difficult conversation, but more importantly, what I think we have raised is to recognize that the foundation is where these issues lie. Even the best intentioned individuals who come in find barriers when it comes to engaging parents within the system, but specifically find added bias on top of fathers.
Thank you for that, Michael. So today we're going to go over some of those key points and principles that we had come up with. Now, I know we only got an hour and a half. We can dive really deep. Actually, it's like more of a 2 to 3 day training. But right now, we just want to give you some good points to walk away with. And then please feel free to reach out afterwards and we can dive a little bit deeper. Okay, so first and foremost, what is a father, right? It's not always just the biological father. It could be a stepfather. It could be just a positive male role model. It could be an uncle. It's not always the biological father. But I like this little poem here. I'm trying to move stuff around here so I could see it. And me and Michael actually talked a little bit about this. And it's a nice little poem. It kind of gets you thinking about fatherhood. And then I want you to notice this picture on the side here, right? It's a pretty cool picture. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. So let me read this. A father is a person who loves and respects you. He is honest and he never neglects you. He is the greatest that your eyes will ever see. No other man like him will there ever be. When you are in your bedroom and scared at night, a father comes in to let you know that everything is all right. Education is important, so stay in school. Hanging out on the streets is not so cool. Listen to me, my son, so the day you become a man, like me, you will do everything you can. A father is like no other man around. Another man like him can never be found. And this is by Sally Williams. I like this poem. I think there's some other ones out there, but this is the dad I wanted to be. This is the dad that I needed. And I got a little bit of that, and I'm trying to be the best dad I can be to my children. So the picture that you see, this is my grandfather here in Arizona. He's a real cowboy. He's passed away. I miss him so much. But the impact that he had on my life lives on to this day. When I was a little boy, I knew I could trust him. He showed me love. He was 6'4". He was a big guy, But his influence it just resonated with me. And I didn't realize it until I got older, the impact that he had. He showed me nurturing. And you wouldn't think that, like, man, nurturing, but no, he showed me nurturing. And I'll tell you how. He took care of the horses. He was always gentle. I never heard him yell, and I know I did some bad things when I was a kid. I was a pretty tough little kid, you know, and pushed his buttons, I'm sure. But he never yelled at me. He guided me. He told me stories that, you know, guided me in my path. But I loved how he was nurturing to all the animals, to my grandmother, to my mother. One thing I really loved about him too was his sense of humor. He loved to tease, and Michael could tell you I have a dry sense of humor and I tease, but it's all out of love. I miss him so much, and I think about what is a father, and it's not always just a dad. We can be positive male role models as men to other children in our lives. Michael, what would you like to share a little bit about this?
Well, you know, you're absolutely right, Edward. Fathers come in various forms, right? And oftentimes, you know, I'm blessed. My parents have been married for 58 years, so I have both parents. And I think about, you know, people think, well, you know, you have both parents, you're blessed, you're lucky, you had a father, you had a mom, but we still had our challenges, right? I still had things that I learned from my dad that I didn't want to carry on or pass on when I became a father. And so I always tried to use the model, which my dad would say, I want you to be better than me. I want you to be, you know, something more than me. And I share that same sentiment with my son. It's like, you
Mhm.
know, son, I want to be better. You know, I love my dad and he was a great example, but I want to be better. And so, really acknowledging that we have opportunities, whether we had a father or not, we develop this passion that sometimes trickles into how we want to parent ourselves. Doesn't mean we always gain the right tools. I was raised on corporal punishment. I, you know, got a spanking with a belt, right? There were definitely marks. But I chose for my own self that I didn't want to have to use corporal punishment in discipline. But a lot of that came from me learning. A lot of that came from other fathers that I learned from other role models that I learned from. You know, I had an uncle who was very involved, who absolutely did not like the corporal punishment piece, and so he would talk to me about what I did wrong, like, you know, and why you got spanked, you know, and this is what happened. My dad didn't always do that. He didn't always talk about it, right? He'd spank me and assume that I understood why. And, you know, like you, Edward, I was a pretty challenging child.
Yeah.
So, you know, I knew what I was doing, but not always, you know, sometimes I didn't. And so my uncle taught me a way of that I got to see both sides of the situation, and I learned that I wanted to be different and I wanted to do things differently. And so, some of this is so important for us to talk about when it comes to fatherhood. And I just want to tell you, Sally Williams was a young lady that I got to meet here in San Diego who did not have a father. She had a lot of uncles. She had two older brothers. She did not have a grandfather. She had a lot of family friends. She belonged to a church where she had a lot of positive male influences. And so this poem was really her vision of what she saw a father should be. And she would say she gathered a lot of that from the men in her life.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And Michelle, I would like to call on you to share. I know we talked a little bit about this, but to get a woman's perspective on what is a father. Can you share a little bit about your grandfather?
Absolutely, yes. So everyone, Edward and I had a chance to connect last week, and we were both just sort of remembering how important our grandfathers were to us. I, like Michael, have both parents. They're alive and well, and I love them very much. But my grandfather and I had a very special connection. And he, more than anyone else in my life as a child understood me. I was and continue to be a very highly sensitive person. And generally that can be annoying to people, especially when you're a small child. And my grandpa just got it. He totally understood where I was coming from. And I felt so safe around him, emotionally safe. As well as like all the physical safety that a strong father figure could provide. I felt like he got me, he understood me. And I mean, it's a love and a relationship that doesn't really compare to anything else that I've experienced. And I feel like, yeah, to the point made earlier about fathers coming in all forms, I think it's a really beautiful thing when it happens, whether or not it's from your biological father. And so I feel very grateful. And he passed in 2015, but I think about him every single day. And I'm absolutely the person I am because of his love and his understanding in our relationship.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now we realize, not all of us have had grandpas or dads in our lives, but I think the point that we're trying to make is we all have a story. We all have a story with male role models in our lives, or maybe the lack thereof. And so it's so important that we work with fathers, because we know that fathers make an important impact in children's lives. And that's why we're doing this work.
Yeah, one other thing I would say is that some of the stigmas and the bias don't always give us the opportunity to hear the stories, right? And to open our minds to, is it possible that we're asking about dad, right? Is it possible there was another male role model in this person's life that took that spot, as far as led as a responsible male, gave that inspiration of a father figure? And so how do we incorporate that in a conversation with dad? Because so much stigma comes in our work around parents in the system, but specifically around fathers.
Thank you for that. Okay, now we're going to share some data points. And I'm sure some of you might have seen this, some of you may have not, but it really shows the importance of fathers. And if you notice this little picture here on the side, that's actually me. That is me on top of, I think it's a Roadrunner back in 1973, I think. And with me is my father. He had just got back from Vietnam. I believe we're in Colorado there. And my mom sent me this picture. I don't have a whole lot of pictures of me and him together when we were little, but I always loved my dad. To this day, he's still around. I loved him. He was my superhero. He was my Hulk. I love the Hulk, Marvel. But he'll always be the Hulk to me. But we didn't always have the greatest relationship. We really didn't. I wish we did. I know that he had experienced some trauma growing up. Definitely going through Vietnam, he experienced a lot of trauma. So when he came back, he was dealing with those issues. So our relationship was strained, but I always love him and I always will. And we're working on our relationship now. We're a lot closer than we ever have been. I'm blessed to have that. But so that's my story. That's my story as a man, as a father, and also that little boy. That's the little boy within right now still. So let's go over some of these data points. So when fathers are present in their children's lives, 45% less likely to repeat a grade. 39% more likely to earn mostly A's in school. 60% less likely to be suspended or expelled from school. And if any, Michael or even Michelle, if anything, stands out to you, please feel free to speak up and we'll talk about it, okay? 2 times more likely to go to college and find stable employment after high school. 80% less likely to spend time in jail. That's a pretty high number right there. Oh, okay. So Michael, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
Yeah, and when fathers are absent in their children's lives, these are some statistics you can find on the U.S. Department of Justice. But we know that 63% of youth there it is, 63% of youth suicide involves a child who is living in a fatherless home when they are made their final decision. So, I mean, just think about that. That's a very important statistic. We also know that 85% of all children who have exhibited some behavioral disorder come from fatherless homes. I think most folks know about the incarcerated men in our prisons right now. A lot of those have identified of coming from fatherless homes. 45% of all sex trade workers grew up without a father. 71% of pregnant teenagers lack a father in their lives. 90% of youth who run away from homes or become homeless for any reason come from fatherless homes. Children who live in fatherless homes are more likely to deal drugs or carry a firearm for offensive purposes compared to children who live with fathers. I think if you haven't read a book called The Boy Crisis by Dr. John Gray and Dr. Warren Farrow, excellent book, talks a lot about these statistics as well. 7 out of 10 youth who are housed in state-operated correctional facilities, include detention centers and residential treatment centers, came from fatherless homes. 75% of rapists are motivated by displaced feelings of abandonment that involves their fathers. And again, the book Boy Crisis, one of the things that Dr. Warren Farrell has been studying, and I hope he has another book soon. Many of you probably read something by him. He's written Men Are From Venus, Women Are From Mars, and many other books. But one of the things he's studying is these mass shootings and how many of those individuals came from father deprived homes. And so I think these are really important statistics to help motivate us for how we partner when it comes to fathers.
So yeah, these numbers, they're really out there, right? I mean, the numbers are really high. I know some people are like, oh, I've seen these before. I know I've seen them several times, but it really hits home. It really does. Like, why are we doing this work? It's important work. It's for the children. But with that said, I want to share a little bit about that picture on the side there. So the one before that, you seen the little guy on the top, that was me sucking my thumb. This is my dad. This is many years later. This was about 13 years ago. And this is my youngest daughter. And we went to go visit my dad. And she didn't want to leave. She did not want to leave. So she has this little, and my dad was there, her grandfather, trying to comfort her and tell her, come on, it's okay. You're going to come back, all of those things. So I just wanted to share that again, talking about, I have a story. I'm a father and I've got a story. So I absolutely love that picture. And a colleague of mine said, oh my gosh, you look just like your dad. I guess so, a little bit. It's passed down, but all right. So let's go to the next one here. All right, so the 4 major principles to authentic fatherhood partnerships. And I think, Michael, this one is yours as well.
Yep. So the first thing we need to do is identify the relationship with our own father. When we talk, and I've had the privilege of working with various jurisdictions across the state, often workforce, we're taught, first of all, how to separate our personal life from our work, right? It's something we do as protection. But what I think we challenge folks is to recognize and identify relationships with their own fathers. Our organization has several support groups across the country that are managed by other fathers, but we also have women who lead some of our support groups. And folks will say, how do you have a men's group with a woman leading it? And I'll tell you, most of those women who lead it come and show up as a daughter who was impacted by their father, whether their father was present or not present. One of those individuals will say that she's had a relationship, she has children, she leaves her experience with her at the door, and she shows up as the daughter who didn't have a father, and talks about that impact in the group. And so often it's so well received when she really is able to identify the relationship with her own father. The next thing is acknowledging the bias. Again, recognizing there's so many stereotypes and bias when it comes to fathers within our system. As a Latino male, I know that I have felt more impacts as a man of color than I've seen specifically when engaging with systems. Like, there is definitely the racial context is present within our systems. We all know that. We can acknowledge the bias around race, but we don't always acknowledge the bias around gender. And I think that's really important. And what does that look like? Understanding authentic partnership, recognizing one, and we're going to dive into this deeper, but what does that mean? Like, we say we partner with parents, we say we want to partner with fathers, but do we really walk our talk? Is the culture we're in supporting that same notion? Like, when you show up to an office, is it really a partnership? Does it feel like a partnership? Something we started practicing in our program when we work with fathers specifically. For the longest time, we were not partnering with our county because we were not willing to share information disclosed in our groups with our fathers, because our fathers trusted us. And so we did, unless the parent or the father gave us consent, we didn't share information that was gathered. That didn't come from our therapists, it didn't come from our counselors or our mentors, etc. But when we finally got to a point where we needed to share some information with the agency, we started transparently writing reports with the parent. So actually, my mentors do not write a report. The parent does, the father does. The father sits down with them. We talk about all of the things that are being documented, and we together, as partners, create a report that goes to the court. And these things are so important because what happens is the father knows before he shows up to court what I'm saying, what they're saying. It's all on document. It's truly authentic partnership. We did it together. The other thing is strategies for implementation. What does it look like? Because when we are dealing with these integrated biases, we have to be awake and conscious and have strategies to achieve what we're trying to do. If the system us to do this thing and it's counterproductive to the partnership we're trying to build, what kind of strategies can you have to stay true to the partnership piece? And so these are really major principles around our work with authentic partnership when it comes to fatherhood.
Yeah, these are the 4 areas that we found out when talking about what works and what doesn't work, that we really believe if you look at the relationship with your own father, it's going to affect how you work with others, if you had a father or you didn't have a father. And with that comes bias, and we all have bias. I think I've probably pushed back on that a little bit in the beginning of having conversations about, bias. Well, what do you mean? Like, I'm not, no, I do. I didn't even realize I had it, but I do. So these are the things that we really believe moving forward. If we implement all of these, it's going to make a lasting impact. And I wanted to mention also that I didn't say in the beginning, but if you have a question, feel free to, raise the little hand there or put it in the chat. And Michelle, if you wouldn't mind letting me know about that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So with that said, does anybody have any thoughts or questions so far?
And we will have time at the end as well, but if you do have something as we're moving forward through this, please, we'd love to have a dialogue with you.
Give it a couple seconds. Anybody? Nope.
All right.
Okay. All right. Being comfortable in uncomfortable silence, right? Uncomfortable silence. Okay, so we're going to dive right into one of the principles, and this is identifying the relationship with our own father. So in order to do that, we've come up with some father roles. And as we're reading these, I'm going to share with you as a father, but also as a son, some of these roles and how they impacted my life and how I want to be these fathers. So one of them is the remote, little involvement with the child. I'm going to share with you my three children that I love so much. My oldest is 28, or going to be 28. I shouldn't push that on her. She doesn't want to be 30. But I really wasn't there as much as I should have been. I really wasn't. And I see the effects in her life now. I've seen it as, she was growing up. And I really regret that. And at times, my own father was also a little remote. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is I have a wonderful stepfather who is just an amazing guy. I love him. He's a musician. He's been there since I was 3 years old. So that's another positive male role model in my life. And he was the provider. He really was. He wasn't a lot about talking about emotions, which, men don't tend to do that normally anyway. But he worked. I mean, he worked hard. He started from the bottom, and wherever he was at, he would just climb the ladder, and he provided. And I was a mean little 3-year-old to him. I know, I'm going to share this story. When I first met him, he had this old van, and of course it's in the 70s, right? Cool little van, and had like a little couch in the back and everything. But he wasn't my dad, and I didn't like him. Who's this guy with my mom? So I peed in the corner of the back of that van, and they love telling me that story. I don't remember it, but I'm pretty sure it happened. But I don't remember getting a whooping. I just remember him being there all the time for me. Even to this day, he is still there for me. And I learned a lot from him in being the provider. So I want to be the provider, father, and I believe I really am doing the best I can. So another father role is the assistant, the secondary parent, helper of mother. And Michael, I want your thoughts on this a little bit, but I look at that as maybe the mother taking the lead role, and this is dad just supporting mother and doing most of the parenting, which I have seen in my life. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will tell you that what we're seeing is these roles, the traditional roles, or the roles that people talk most about, have really changed, right? I know more and more stay-at-home dads that are taking on principal role of being the parent at home, taking care of the children, doing the homework, et cetera, et cetera. I find more and more parents that are just really cohabitating with their children, like doing all of these different things, sharing them equally, not having one over the other, but really displaying a partnership, right? So I see that as well. In a growth cycle, because we're seeing younger and younger fathers that are coming into this space that are wanting to be more than just whatever they had or what they didn't have.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this is shared caregiver. I think this is where I definitely want to be. I think a lot of fathers want to be the shared caregiver, where there is co-parenting, it's equitable, it's sharing in the responsibilities, it's sharing in the nurturing. I think this is where we want to be, whether the father is in the home or outside of the home. I think it's so important to be the shared caregiver. And I do my best with, I know my daughter's a little bit older now, but looking back on it, I really wasn't there. I kind of let her do a lot of it. But now that I've grown a little bit as a father, this is something that I really want to teach the fathers that we work with, and share, like, we can do both, and the children really benefit from this shared caregiver. And then primary caregiver, I would say this is primary responsibility of the child. As a single father of two children, my two youngest, I've been the single dad for 13 years now, 14 years. And I get it. When I hear the stories about single moms and everything that they got to go through, and the work that they got to do and all of this pressure, I get it. I'm with you, Mom. I totally understand. I have a whole new empathy for you, and my mom as well. But you know, I would prefer the shared caregiver over the primary caregiver. It's so much pressure. But this is a father role. Now, another thing I wanted to mention too, as if you haven't been already, but as we're going through these roles, do you see some of your father? Do you see some of the roles in your father in your life? And then absent, not engaged, not involved, not around. This was definitely me as well. It was remote, but I was also completely absent. With my oldest daughter, I wasn't engaged at times. I wasn't involved. I wasn't around. And in my mind, I was keeping her from the toxic lifestyle that I was in at that time. But she needed me. She really needed me, and it's one of my biggest regrets in life, not being there for her, because you can't go back. I feel like I kind of get a second chance now with my little Gracie, my little 2-year-old, who looks just like her mom, except she's got blonde hair and blue eyes. I kind of get that second chance, but I could never go back to holding my little redhead, green-eyed daughter at 5 or 6 when she needed her dad. And it breaks my heart, and I know the damage that it did. Michael, what are your thoughts on some of the fathers that maybe you've worked with in dealing with absences?
So I have to go into my basic niche of bias, right? Because if you look at all these roles, some of them sound really good, but our systems don't recognize these roles. These roles, some of us would love to be a goal, some of us would love to see, as what our roles are, but our systems don't recognize these roles. Much of our systems recognize the absent dad, and that is a label that isn't always fairly put on dad, right? Depending on the system that you're in. Our family court system really doesn't recognize all of these roles, and often sees dad, if you're here or you've done this or you're in this place, then you're really an absent or a remote dad, right? And so recognizing that while there are some incredible descriptive roles here, we want to achieve this, we want to have these roles, we want to work towards those, but our systems don't always recognize these roles. And so that's something also that we have to struggle with when we're talking about the cultures and the systems and the foundations of the systems, because ideally, an assisted secondary parent, that sounds great, right? But is that the way that our system is set up to help support? So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go into acknowledging bias. We know that when we know our experiences, we can authentically connect with others. As Michelle, you shared about your grandfather, I know there were many of us who were going, oh yeah, I had something similar. I know many of us were thinking about our own experiences. As a member of a workforce that doesn't typically share, that it's part of the vulnerability that we protect, right? If you're somehow able to connect with the father that you're working with by sharing those experiences, that's going to really help you. but more importantly, to understand that the bias that exists, and these biases you don't have to own the biases. They don't have to be your beliefs, but the understanding is that you're working in a culture that has these biases infiltrated within them. And so, prejudged in favor or against something is obviously a person or a group is obviously a bias, right? And when you think about it, family court, going back to family court, in the 1950s, they repealed a law that was here in California that was called the tender years. And what that said was that in a couple that was getting divorced, if the child was under the age of 2, they automatically went with mom. And so for a long time, we've had systemic bias like that. I know a judge here in San Diego that continues, even though that law's been gone, continues to believe that a child under the age of 2 belongs with mom. And so that stigma and that bias still exists within her space. Can be a conscious or subconscious. Oftentimes we don't recognize that subconscious bias, also known as implicit bias, is something that hits us without even really being awake about it. I'll tell you that in today's time and day, if you're watching social media, how much influence does that have on you? How much influence are you gathering from that and developing possibly a bias one way or another? I know if there's a specific, I have a young man that works with me, and if there's a specific actor that he loves, he adores, if he says something, it's like old. It's like I can prove it wrong, and he's already bought into that, right? And there's this subconscious bias, and there's a lot of things that connect him to those bias, right? That he's just not aware of. So also bias could be created, cultivated, and formed both internally and externally. Where most, I'll speak about child welfare. Most child welfare agencies have really started to come around and understand that parents can help other parents, right? And so there's now more mentorships, there's more programs around peer support. But what they don't recognize is that the system is not ready and has not been set up. The culture has not been set up to truly support those parents coming into the workforce. And so it's been a challenge. Many of you may have seen this. I mean, it's even hard for the system, who has its own culture, to embrace community partnership, right? That means that they have to give up a little bit of power. And so there's bias when it comes to these types of things, including the culture that exists within the system. And also, it could be influenced by personal experience or trauma. Often when Edward and I do trainings together, we're very conscious about the different experiences, the different traumas that happen. I talk about the fact that I have both parents. I have both of my parents. They're actually part-time, live with me part-time. They're in their late 70s. But what I haven't talked about is that when I got involved in child welfare, it's because I am openly gay. My biological son was in my care. I've been primary custody since he's 6 months old, and he was 5. And there was concern from family members of why a gay male is raising by himself a male child. I had 2 years of intense investigations of sexual abuse, which never occurred, but imagine the horrific allegation of itself. It's one of the worst things that you could say to a father about this allegation. And it went on and went on. And my parents, my family, disowned me at a portion because they didn't agree with my lifestyle, right? And so I have my own bias when it comes to certain things, including religion. Both my parents are very religious. Both my parents were Republican. Both my parents have very strong a place in their own personal beliefs that have triggers for me. And so I have to be mindful of how those triggers and how that trauma shows up when I'm working in spaces, and be real about, there's times where I've had a time where this in particular father came in, and I swear he was using language that my dad uses, and I was triggered. And I was mindful enough to pass him over to somebody who can really engage appropriately, because I couldn't at that moment. I just couldn't. I kept thinking about the things he said. I kept thinking and identifying them to my own personal story. Now, I am professional enough to where I should be able to segregate that, right? But I want to show up authentically every time. I want to do my best to be a partner. And so to me, I had to take a hard look at that and recognize I shouldn't be involved in this. At least I shouldn't be the direct person involved in this. And so understanding our bias and knowing what strategies we can do to go around them, because when you hear the word bias, we don't, it's not always going to be a bad thing, right? We get these biases and influences from the world around us, the world we live in. The key here is to be awake about it. The key here is to strategize a way to navigate through this and still show up authentically and still show up as a partner.
Thank you, Michael. I was thinking about bias, and with my father, coming back from Vietnam and dealing with the trauma and us growing up, a bias for me, and I think about this, and it happened a couple years ago, but I remember him having, sometimes he was really angry and he would yell, and as a little boy growing up, it would scare me and it would make me feel a certain way. And he always wore Brute cologne. I don't know if anybody remembers Brute cologne. I think it's still around, but just that smell, right? And I remember working with a father, and he wore Brute. I could smell that, and automatically it took me back to that little boy. So it triggered something in me. And I had to be real careful on how I treated him, because he wasn't my dad, right? But it triggered me. So I had to make sure I checked my bias, and treated him as the individual that he is, and the human that he is, and knowing that he had his own story. But working with fathers, it's really important that we check our bias, recognizing what those are, and not letting it lead us down a negative path.
And Edward, I want to add that, we incorporated here our personal experience and traumas. And that is, we put it with bias, but that is really something that we have to understand impacts us, right? It's subconscious sometimes. I mentioned my parents are now in their late 70s. My mom has diabetes. I am primary caregiver. I've lost my older brother. They live half the time with my niece. That's because I'm still trying to maneuver through having them live with me full time. But it's really my personal experience and my own trauma has really made me take a look of how I want to show up through the rest of their life. It's really challenged me to do what I say I want to do, which is be better, right? Because I get triggered all the time. And when they're spending time with me, or I'm taking them to lunch, and it's a trigger, like you're Brute, Edward, like you're Brute, it's a trigger when my dad will raise his glass to call the waitress over. And, it's, to me, it's like snapping his fingers, hey, I need service over here. And I get so upset. But really, there's a lot more to it. There's so much more deeper into it. In this situation, I have to evaluate my relationship. I have to evaluate how I want to show up, because there is no opportunity for me to walk away. I know that I'm going to be here for them. So it's a real challenge to recognize my history my experience and my trauma. And so some of this we have to acknowledge as well, is that we're impacted by our experiences, and it shows up at times, whether we're vocal about it or not. It shows up.
Absolutely. And one thing too, and then we'll move forward, is it could be a bias too, where you've had a fantastic father, right? And he did everything right, and he raised you right, and you never had a bad relationship or anything like that. And now you're working with fathers. Are you holding them to that standard?
Yeah.
Are you holding them to this unrealistic standard that they're not your dad, right? So I think it's important to look at both ways. So we've talked about acknowledging the relationship we've had with our own father, and now we're talking about the bias, and it's really looking within in order to authentically partner with fathers. So this is a wonderful little video. We're going to play it and then open it up for thoughts. Let's just take it away.
They were afraid that no one would
What happened?
come to a Breakfast with Dads event for middle school boys in South Dallas.
We were asked to help get some extra guys to kind of stand in as surrogate fathers and mentors for the kids whose dads couldn't make it or don't have a dad in their life.
On Facebook, they put out a plea for 50 additional men to show up, and word spread quickly.
It shut down the volunteer site on DISD, the site crashed because we had so many men signing up to participate. We have some anyone here to your left, my right, and in the front.
Instead of 50, around 600 showed up.
So let's fit in. We got a bunch of brothers still out there getting signed up.
Men of all ages, races, and backgrounds filled Dade Middle School's auditorium.
We are extremely excited about this event.
And as the principal welcomed the students in, it was a loud speed round of introductions in an effort to connect. On the left is Christian Anoha. He said he didn't hesitate to sign up for this event.
I just want to make sure that I was able to get back. You know, in my life, I had men around me that, always gave me an opportunity and provided me support. So I just want to do the same thing.
He and the other well-dressed volunteers brought extra ties
Not a little forehand.
to teach the young men of Dade how to tie one. Christian said he used to wear clip-ons
Tuck it inside here.
until his fraternity brothers showed him the way.
And slide it up, push it up.
Now he gets to share his knowledge of knots.
So how'd it go?
Well, kind of stumbled a little bit, but we got it there.
But not all the men were as well versed in the art of the half Windsor.
So it was like, oh, okay. It's like, we're gonna have to redo this one. But, it was a very productive day for me and my friends.
Exorion McCorder joining his peers at the second half of this event, where the kids were eager to congregate around their respective curiosities. Fathers and mentors offering what they had to give,
So how do you like it?
including guidance.
You're taking a giant step in a positive direction with everything that we have going on in life, as far as words, your own children, but you fail to realize that there are kids out here that, need someone to speak, need someone to talk to. I think Zorian, he was, one that is just basically a testament to that. He opened up, more than I, would have thought. So much more than me speaking of who I am, he was the person that was, willing to just pour it out.
And for Exorion, his takeaway after an hour-long conversation with Christian,
All I gotta do, hope and pray and continue to be positive around my friends, family, and my future mentor.
Breakfast with Dads, wrapped up arm in arm with a bond so big it couldn't fit within this screen.
All right, great. Just please, right ahead, close your honor.
The platform was provided, and these men answered the call for help simply by showing up.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Wow. I've seen that video several times, and each time it just hits me. I mean, there's several takeaways that I get from that, but I'd like to open it up to anyone or Michael, if you'd like to even start off, or even Michelle, what did you take away from this showing up video?
Yeah, this is the second time I saw it. We were preparing for this, and like you, Edward, it's very touching. The first thing that comes to my mind is how often I hear about fathers not showing up, and how many fathers showed up, how many men showed up here. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. The second thing that comes to my mind is kudos to that school, because they didn't turn them away. They got more than they needed, and they opened their doors, right? And I think that is such an important lesson for us to learn here about, one, they're showing up, and the school embraced them. I'm sure they were not ready for 600. They said 50, right?
You're right.
So those are a couple of key takeaways. It'd be great to hear if anyone else has any thoughts around that video.
Yeah, I think numbers are important. The time they spent, with the young men, that's very important, and time is important as well. And the thing about time, I've mentioned this several times before, it's something you can't get back, but the time you do have, you want to cherish it with your children. Even if you're not a father, even mentors to young people is just as equally important.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, very important. Very important.
Anyone else wish to come off mute or raise your hand or put a comment in the chat?
I would just like to say that, looking at it from the child's perspective, if the child, was having an off day or a week and feeling like nobody cared, this was just an opportunity to show them that somebody did.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
The smiles, I mean, the smiles on their faces and the excitement, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, I like to say the power in community, because it takes a village.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That's it.
600 of them, right? 600 dads showing up. And I think about, a stereotype. And I know you mentioned a little something about this, Michael, is like, we think of dads as, we hear the deadbeat dad terms, and we hear those kind of stereotypes, but this goes against that, right? When given the opportunity, these men stood up and was there for these boys. And to see, I love that part of it, is seeing the children, knowing that 600 men, 600 fathers, 600 male role models showed up to support you. What a great feeling. And you know what? That's going to live on with them. They're going to remember that and hopefully pass that forward.
Yeah, and I want to tell you that about 6 or 7 years ago, my program was really struggling with funding. There wasn't a lot of funding. A lot of fatherhood programs have challenges with funding, right? And one of the things that we started doing was created curriculum for our mentors. We had 97 men that went through our program and came back and said, I want to help. I want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. How do I help? And we developed a curriculum to create a fatherhood mentorship, a program that was recognized by both the courts. So they were actually trained in advocacy. They were actually able to get curriculum training around all of these different things. And the amazing piece was 97. That's a huge number. 97 of them were trained through this and consistently supported other men. So I see when the table is set and we're inviting, they will show up. They will show up. The keys that we're going to talk about is, how do we keep them, right? How do we partner with them? How do we, because we have invested in engagement. I'm not saying we get it right all the time, because we're still struggling with that. But the truth is that we're learning more and more about what it looks like to truly partner. And we know that men are showing up. We know that fathers are showing up. So we're going to go into understanding authentic partnership, creating a space where all feels heard, respected, and valued. I think that, we understand that the dynamic of the makeup within the child welfare system specifically, I will say, tends to be a majority of women, right? And so creating that space, I so often I hear dads that go in and they tell me common language. I felt alone. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel valued. We went over mom's, stuff and what mom had to do. I was not able to give an input. I was only asked to sign off on what they created. I wasn't allowed to participate. When we dive deeper into that, understanding that nobody verbally said don't participate, but they certainly did not create the space for dad to participate. Cultivating connections and collaborations. What we're learning and what we go back to is when you build on trust and relationship, things happen. Connections are so important because when you're able to connect, you will be able to collaborate. Most of the men that I've worked with that have had strong connections with their social workers or their providers, they've had some kind of vulnerable connection that has happened. Sometimes it's unintentional, right? I remember a young lady who was with the YWCA here in San Diego, and she was supporting a father, and she didn't say much to him. And then somewhere in the middle of the case, she identified and said, I just want to tell you, you're a really good dad. My dad, I don't think would have ever done these things. And he picked up on it. That formed a connection with those two. And that was the beginning of a conversation because she was still new. She was guarded. She was careful about the different things that she wanted to say or share. And so, having that connection was everything in that case. Lord, I see your hand. I'd love to welcome you to come off mute and share or ask your question.
Yes. First, just pleasure really to be here and thank everybody for joining and learning about this information. But I wanted to make a comment of what you had just said, Michael, about how fathers are not heard, not seen, kind of an afterthought in a lot of these situations. And it's something that is true to form. I work with a lot of fathers, and that's one of the things that I resonate with them whenever I speak with them. I say, you are the rarity. A lot of fathers cannot withstand the test of this time. This is a long haul. This isn't a short, instant gratification. And I let them know that by what they're doing today is investing in their children's emotional banks. We are putting away that instant gratification when they're young for that long-term longevity for the rest of their lives. And a little transparency of myself, I met my father when I was 19 years old. And from that day on, we've had a substantial relationship. And it was something that I was very aware of, that, him not being apart was not something that he wanted. He actually seeked us out and tried to find us and tried to be in our lives. And, present day with myself going through similar situations, it is challenging for a father. So with seeing that last video and my comment in the chat, it was, as long as fathers know that these things are available, they will show up. Because going through my own trials and tribulations, I didn't know any of this stuff was available until I did many hours of Google searching, trying to find support groups, trying to find programs that I got involved in, and now the organization that I work with. And that's something that not only that I don't necessarily struggle with I look for fathers everywhere I go. But I'm just seeing that the lack of marketing, if we want to say marketing or outreach, is just not there. And, one of the things that I want to make sure that this organization, community, that we continue to be very boisterous out there, because that's one of the hardest relationships to form, is a male to male friendship. So, as long as our fathers are aware, they will show up. The video was a great example of it. They knew they got wind. They went up the listening tree, and they all came together. But just not seeing these things happen, it's kind of disheartening, because you want to make sure that our fathers are aware and not just falling on deaf ears.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Thank you for sharing.
appreciate that, Lord, really. Edward said something earlier, and and you just kind of touched on it too. As men, we don't talk a lot, right? And there's not a lot of community where we can talk, especially about situations of vulnerability when it comes to our children, when it comes to the lack of our children. Sometimes there's gatekeeping involved, sometimes, and that's a real thing that folks don't recognize all the time, that there is gatekeeping. There's systemic gatekeeping as well, which I call bias, right? So, really being able to understand the authentic partnership part of it is continued those connections, develop those collaborations, encourage and empower. As Lord was talking about, his own experience, there were men in my group. Let me back up. Under President Obama, I was appointed to be on a committee that was with Mathematica. We did a research project. We had a lot of men who were alienated from their children. Many of them would say they walked away, right? You've heard of men walking away. Many of them would say, we did it because we thought it was the best interest of the children. Many of them would say, I thought I was horrible. I thought I wasn't as good as they needed. I loved them so much that I really, it had a lot to do with their own issues, right? And the system. They had child support, they had social workers, they had all these different things on top of them. And so there was a generation where men were walking away. What we see and what we found in our research was that more and more men are standing by, are staying in, are stepping up. A lot of men we found were coming from only single mother homes. And they were like, I do not want to repeat this. I know what it was like to not have a father. And so we're seeing more and more of that opportunity to encourage and empower, and to really support those men where they are, strategizing and co-signing solutions. Again, it's so awesome if you could sit down with a dad and develop that trust by saying, let's write tomorrow's court report out together. Let's sit down and let's talk about what this looks like. The transparency is part of trust. And trust is critical in every partnership and every relationship. If you don't have that transparency, trust, it's one of those opportunities of strategies that would fail. Without that trust, it would fail. I know we're going to move right into our next, and I think we're getting close on time, Edward. So we may want to.
We are, and I was worried we weren't going to have enough material, but it's going great, I believe. So I think we're going to do some breakouts, and I think maybe we'll shorten it to 15 minutes or maybe 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah.
10 minutes, okay. So what we're going to do is go into a small group discussion here, some breakout rooms, and think of a relationship that you value and has positively impacted your life. And what are some of the characteristics of that relationship? So when you get into the room, you're going to do some brief introductions, and then you're going to come up with a list. So if someone could be the note taker and come up with a list, and then if someone, and it could be the note taker or not, could report back out, and we'll have a small conversation about it. Okay? Thank you all so much. Michelle, you got this? Awesome.
Yep, I'm going to open the rooms right now.
All right. Welcome back as we got folks coming in. Breakouts are always hit or miss. Hopefully you guys had some conversation around what are some characteristics of the relationship that has positively impacted your life. So if anyone would like to share either in the chat or come off mute with just some key characteristics that you all have come up with, or you want to now mention what those are, that would be awesome.
Would this be for each individual in our group or just for us?
Well, either one. I mean, we'd love to just kind of get some characteristics down to see what you got.
All right. So some of the people in the group said that their grandparents, the aunts, the parents were positive influences in their lives. And some of the influences, characteristics that we got from the groups were wisdom, positive role modeling, unconditional love, consistency, being kind, being present, quality time, strong foundation for the family. So those are some characteristics.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Nice. Others.
Yeah, in addition to that, we did identify in our group the characteristics of healthy relationships being communication is a big one. Caring about others' feelings, trusts and encourages, knows your best self, unconditional in love and care, listening, caring, and involved. And also acknowledging that some people do not have a healthy or positive relationship in their life.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
good.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm writing some of these down.
Others. So I'm going to jump in and say that for me, positive impacts in my life often included trust. There was somebody that I trusted, that we had some experiences together, that knew me, or at least I felt like they knew me, right? There was a relationship with a foundation based on trust. And I think as we start to look at these different characteristics around those relationships that impacted your life, we start to understand that we as workforce intersecting with fathers, we have to make a decision of how we want to develop this partnership and how we can invest in this partnership as a relationship, as those relationships that we value. How do we integrate those characteristics in those relationships we're forming?
So with that, we've come up with some strategies for implementation in authentically partnering with fathers. And so we asked you those questions because, one of the things that came up was trust, right? Well, trust takes time to build. And with these strategies, and Michael, jump in whenever you want to, and I'm just going to list them all out, and we'll kind of briefly go over them. I know we're running out of time, and I have to admit, I didn't know if we had enough to go through, but it's been really it's been going good, and so we appreciate everybody still being here. Cultural competency and sensitivity, I think that is huge. That is a strategy that we must have. Positive engagement and equal partnerships. This is a huge one when working with fathers. Child-centered approach and strength-based approach. If we're always looking at the wrong and trying to fix what's wrong, and this comes from another training for the 5 protective factors, right? It's strength-based approach. If we're looking at the strengths of the father, we're able to build on those. But when we're talking with the father and partnering with them, if it's always about the child, the best interest of the child, then we can come together as a team and truly partner. Michael, I'll go ahead and share about a couple of these.
Transparency, communication. Someone mentioned, I think, Gabriel, you mentioned communication. You know, these are all important. Collaboration and planning, respect, privacy, and dignity. Recognize and appreciate. These are critical because they're not something we typically see within the culture of our work. We often talk about it, but these are actually implementing. You know, how do we consciously show up and implement these feedback mechanisms? It's important to hear, you know, what dads are saying, how the relationship's going. In all of your relationships, you have feedback, right? You have feedback with how things are going within your relationships. Conflict resolution. It's so important to have a strategy around how am I going to resolve a conflict that arises. Active listening and supportive services. You know, active listening is most often a difficult thing for some of us. Oftentimes, you know, in the workforce, we're expected to have the answers. And so we're ready to give answers instead of listening to what really is going on and what the father is feeling. Following the ethical standard and community collaboration. I think the community collaboration is so key. Someone said it earlier. It's so true. It takes a village. So how do we lean on our communities? And the thing for me for communities is communities have a much better pulse on the community that they serve than often the agencies do. So how does the community collaborations work? And they're critical in engaging with fathers. Accessibility and regular updates. A common thing that many of the men in our program prior to the pandemic saw just under 1,000 men come through the program. And interestingly, 40% of those were child welfare cases. About 56% of those were family court, and the remaining were probate, which is where guardianship happens in our courts. And I heard from fathers that they didn't get responses to emails, they didn't get callbacks, they didn't get all of these things. And so communication is so important. So we just kind of blasted through that. Michelle just put a link for a survey. We want to open it up for any questions or comments. And then we do have one last video to share with you as we close out, and hopefully you could stay and watch this if you hadn't seen it, because it's just a fun video to end with. But for now, if anyone has any thoughts, comments, or would like to share anything, please do as we're getting ready to conclude our presentation for today.
Yeah, I think it was a great informative group. You know, thank you all, you know, for putting this out there. It's a great resource, and it's something that we can share, you know, with our families and loved ones as well. So thank you.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you so much. Thank you.
One thing I want hopefully you all to take away is that, you know, for us, Fatherhood Authentic Partnership is not a one and done. This is a continuous, supportive community that we're trying to build. We're raising the conversation every day, every way, every step, and we're keeping it front and center. It can't be done in workshops, just one and done. It has to be supported. There has to be a culture shift. There has to be an acknowledgement of bias so that we can really elevate and bring to light true authentic partnership and know that our children are the ones who will benefit from this.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. We're going to play a fun, uplifting video, and then we'll close it out. Please reach out to us through Michelle or any way you can. We would love to maybe present more, talk with your agency, or just talk with you, and maybe dive deeper into those strategies for implementation. Thank you all so much for being here, and we appreciate it very much.
volume.
Come on and find it.
Salut papa, joyeux Noël.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to stick around. Michael, you want to stick around? Everybody's
Yep, we're
questions or
here.
anything?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, anyone who does have to jump, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And if you are free to stay and you want to ask questions or chat with Michael and Edward, please feel free. I will keep the space open.
You're gonna make me cry with that music.
I love that music too. Red
It's a
Bone.
fun video.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Claire, I didn't see you there. How you doing?
Hi, Claire.
Hey friends, I actually joined late, so I just snuck in.
Oh,
But what I was able to attend was really real and thoughtful. So, you know, that just speaks to your experience, but also your ability to engage people. So thank you for doing this with us.
Yes.
thank you. Thank you. Good to
Thank
see
you from New Jersey.
New Jersey. All right.
Woohoo!
Thank
National.
you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Now, do you guys provide? I did write down the link. Do you provide any additional workshops? For families, for dads.
Yeah, the website is in the process of being redone. We have a whole lot of things that are coming. It'll be released on February 1st. But we do a lot of advocacy training. We do more, community relationship building. We have strategies around that. A lot of our mission is around technical support. So we like to set up a way to where we're constantly in contact with you, supporting you, developing our own relationship with you so that we can help support you along the way. But we do have both workforce curriculum as well as we teach the Nurturing Father curriculum, protective factors for dads. There's a couple of other boot camps for dads, new dads. And a lot of what we try to do is support communities who want to do this. What we do is we train the trainers kind of thing, so that we can help you all be able to produce this in your own community. And then we're there for support as you go from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So I did write the link down. So you said about early February.
Yeah, February 1st is supposed to be released, but both Edward and I can be reached at our first name. It's Michael at popsorganization.org, and Edward at popsorganization.org as well.
Okay. Pops. All right. All righty. Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for the class. Hopefully looking forward to seeing you guys again sometime in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's work together.
All right. Okay. Have a good one.
You.
You too.
I'm going to look at the chat now.
Yes. That would be great. Is it Lelinda? That would be great. Yeah, we do have, one of the things that in the work that we've done is we've seen both Edward and I have participated in establishing parent packs for states. So there's different states, including Arizona. Edward's on the pack for Arizona. And what we were learning is that there's not a lot of support for those individuals, right? They're coming into this space. And so we've developed a lot around advocacy, volunteer advocacy. What does it look like? How do we make sure that we're advocating and empowering the parents and honoring their situation and not carrying our own situation into it? And so really just learning techniques on advocacy, learning techniques on self-care, making sure that we're not re-traumatizing ourselves, which sometimes we walk into on a regular with this. We also recognize that the retention in peer support advocates there's a huge turnover, and a lot of it has to do with the secondary trauma. Once again, sometimes folks leave feeling like they weren't supported, and so it's almost the same feeling they had when they were on their own, but now they're feeling this way in the system. So we have some great curriculum, and Edward and I do some trainings around this as well. But yeah, we'd be happy to take our information, and we'd be happy to talk more about that. Awesome.
All right. Phew.
Michael, I really appreciate your insight on this. Like I said earlier, I'm a father that's been in the process, gone through the process, and that's one of the main things. It's like you're seeking support, you find these support networks, and yet after conversations or intakes or consults, you feel almost worse,
Yeah.
or even more behind the eight ball. Afterwards, you think, okay, I'm going to get some sort of solution or some sort of inside info, or maybe a direction to go into, and as soon as you're done, they're like, all right, thanks, see ya, and everybody else is happy, and it's like, but wait, what am I supposed to do next? So I'm really interested to see what this organization does, and how the difference between the impact of what we've seen in prior organizations to what this one can do now.
Yeah, it's interesting because that study we did with Mathematica and the federal government, we learned that there was a lot of folks that after we left the program, they felt like they were just clients. Like we were a guinea pig. And it was not our intention. I was a faculty member on that team that did the research. We were intently invested. We developed relationships, but then the relationship ended, contract was done, research was done, and folks really felt back in the same place of being alone again.
Yep.
And so one of the things that Edward and I are continuously trying to do, and as you get to know me, and Edward can tell you, I have lots of friends across the country that I stay in contact with. It's like part of who I am, to make sure that those relationships are nurtured and taken care of, right? And so, and likewise, the response is the same. We generate that same response, but how do we integrate that in the work and make sure that you're supported, and when you're not, that you're still supported in coming forward and saying, hey, I still need these types of things. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll connect the two of you.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Another authentic friendship.
Thank you guys for allowing us in the space. It was really a fun time. I always love working with one of my favorite people in the world, Edward. And so it's a good space, especially the conversation. Claire, we're here to help any way we can. If you need anything, please let us know, because we're more than willing and able to come out and do whatever needs to be done.
Fantastic, Michael. I there may be other opportunities. So thanks for that direct offer of support.
Yep. All right.
Thank
Stay
you,
well,
Sally.
everybody.
Claire.
Thank you both.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.